Sander, what we agreed blue, right?
I missed the memo.
Yesterday we were all wearing exactly the same. You know Kate Garvey? Really? Literally me, Sander and Kate were wearing exactly the same. Yeah, no, total coincidence. No, we've got a Facebook. We check out in with each other. You just tell me when you're ready. You good? Yeah, do you want to start with some breathing yoga, Christoph? We can if you want. If you know I've got that in the locker if we need it. So first of all, thank you very, very much indeed on behalf of all of the partners in this, but particularly thank you to Sander and to the UN Global Compact. Thank you to the teams at Accenture. Thank you to all of you, many of you who participated in the study, and a huge thank you to Christoph and to Ecolab, who's been an absolute joy of a partner for nearly 15 years, I worked out, which starts to age us and date us a little bit. I have to say this is one of the most important studies that we've ever worked with and commissioned for the UN Global Compact. I started the first study in 2007, so this is my 15th year of the CEO study, 12th edition. And this one I think is different. It's different for a number of reasons. The first is, as I'm sure nobody in this room has missed, this is the year where the pivot has to happen. Yesterday, I thought Kate Garvey put it extremely well in her. Kate Garvey is the CEO of Project Everyone and came up with the graphic for the SDGs that many of us see and use, and also around the London Olympics communication. So she's very, very, very good at, I think, encapsulating the moment. And I think the key takeaway I took from her yesterday in our conversation with Sander was that we're halfway through the goals, but we definitely are not halfway to delivering the goals. That's certainly likely to be the outcome of the stock take this year. But every game is won in the second half. And as a football fan who lost to Man City and Man United in the 93rd and 95th minutes the week before the World Cup, supporting Fulham, I really can tell you, on the other side of the coin, you really can lose in the last minute. So we have to stay the course and stay till the very final moment when the referee blows the whistle in 2030 and even beyond. But it's also a very important study for a second reason. It is the largest study that we've ever conducted on chief executives and their opinions. And that's quite something in the context. So having done 12 of these now, and having had the largest sample of interviews with CEOs at about 1,200, something like that, to have 2,600 CEOs spend an hour with us to either support by an hour interview or to actually fully fill out the questions, I think shows the growing recognition of the role of business. They shared many of the bright spots where they are actually really making progress that they want others to know about. But they also, I think, are very aware that their industries and their sectors and across sectors that actually business needs to step up. And I think that's something that's being echoed, and I think you'll hear reverberate through the week, that first of all, as you'll hear from in a minute, Michael, who's the one who's really done all the work and really has, with the teams, sort of sweated the hours. But you'll hear, for any of you in the room, and I spend most of my time with boards and with CEOs, it's hard out there, right? I think the number of CEOs that told us they had 10 or more existential threats to their business that they were dealing with and managing in the next 3 to 5 years was more than 90%, right? So the headwinds that nobody could have predicted in the last 3 years. I mean, I've been someone who's been saying, watch out, Russia is a real issue in terms of our lack of diversity in Europe for a long time, but I didn't think that we were going to end up in a conflict at that particular point in time. Nobody predicted the pandemic scale. Nobody predicted the Afghanistan exit in the way it happened. There are many other examples of this, but also, as the study shows, nobody in business predicted how fast the physical impacts of change in the environment, particularly dangerous climate change, would kick into their global supply chains, their value chains. We heard CEO after CEO tell us that this wasn't tomorrow, this is now, right? That they were seeing physical infrastructure damage to their warehousing, to their shipping, to their transport systems from storms gathering heat from oceans that have warmed already at 1 degree to 1.2 degrees. They told us about droughts, they told us about floods, they told us about forest fires. Not bigger, actually, funnily enough, according to the insurers, not more Katrinas and Sandys, but actually far more diverse, far more distributed, and far more common. And you see that, for example, last year in the insurance industry, paying out a 30% extra overall in directly climate-related events. One CEO told me he thought that was, I'm not going to swear at this time in the morning, and that it was at least 10x that, but they couldn't make it absolutely clear that it was science-based climate change that had caused the additional situation. So if you ask any scientists, it's a lot worse than a lot of people focus on. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we need to do a few things. Firstly, I think the CEO tells us it's hard. Let's not point fingers. Let's focus on how we create the pivot, right? And one of the things that was very clear in the study is that those companies, those bright spots that we need to learn from, that we need to try to replicate. Ecolab is one of those, genuinely, and Christophe has led from the front, even before being CEO, in helping us create things like the circuits, but also been the champion within Ecolab and Sander. I mean, I don't want to take you back to your history, but you were a complete pioneer at Safari, you know, in terms of the way you empowered social issues. So we've got people who are both at the multilateral end of the spectrum, but also have deep experience in practice of actually using technology, using innovation, using collaboration, and using different forms of investment and partnerships and collaboration across industries and within industries to actually create the multiplier effect that gets us to the speed at scale that's now required, and it is required, based at least on what I'm aware of the data so far on the stock take. Now, the CEO study at its core, and I'm going to let Michael take us through the details, but I would take away a few key messages. First of all, I would say the biggest theme that has entered the fray that we saw only ever on the margins, but now the number one theme at the absolute center of CEOs tackling and taking opportunity of the challenges we face on delivering the SDGs by 2030, delivering the 2030 Paris milestones, is resilience. And the integrated nature of building resilient businesses. Resilient to not just climate or circular economy, biodiversity, water, nature, deforestation, oceans, but also social disruption in supply chains in terms of human rights abuses, forced labor, or the missed opportunity, as we talked about yesterday, of gender from a racial and from a female empowerment perspective of the kinds of change agents that we need in order to deliver the goals, and creating genuinely diverse workforces and genuinely diverse supply chains. So I think that's one of the big findings to start with. Resilience has moved literally from nowhere in the last 2 years to the absolute center. The second is, what we heard again and again from CEOs is that one company's resilience challenges are another company's new products, new services, new markets, and ways of innovating and reinventing their business, and often compressing that transformation at speed, right? Because a lot of CEOs, and certainly that I speak, know that they've got a business today that they've got to run because it's delivering for shareholders quarter to quarter or delivering for owners, but actually they've got one that they need to reinvent in 2 to 3 years, and it's a heck of a journey to get from here to there in talent, which came out a lot, as well as the data and the data-driven revolution in ESG that we're only at the foothills of, but is starting to become a major source of competitive advantage for those companies that can find the ways to leverage it. So the flip side, the other side of the coin of resilience, is growth. And if we really do what we need, which in my view, I'm not sure I'm speaking on behalf of Accenture, in fact I probably can speak off the behalf of Accenture, but I think I would put this akin to what Jamie Dimon, I'm going to blame him, at JP Morgan said when we spoke to him, which was that Europe needs an energy Marshall Plan. Well, actually, I think what we heard was from the Global South, and this is the largest ever CEO study of the Global South, to be clear, largest ever set of voices of CEOs from the Global South. We need something akin to the global financial crisis, Keynesian monetary investment, both public and private sector, to tackle a lot of the issues that we're talking about, not messing around trying to deliver on the 100 trillion that we committed 7 years ago for the Climate Change Fund. We're talking about that level. And it turns out, I don't know about you guys, but when I look at, anyone here a US banker? All of them seem to be doing all right to me. The US doesn't seem to have fallen apart post saving Lehman and post the banking system saving itself from crisis. So add that to the fact that in the pandemic we showed how quickly we could create change. I'll give you one example, just as an example, and then I'll let Michael take you through. In the NHS in the UK, the National Health Service, we went through what would have been a 5-year change journey to put the NHS onto Teams so they can communicate better. It would have been 5, and that was conservative, probably 5 to 7, to get 80% of them all in 2 weeks, right? So don't believe any of the narrative this can't be done, or that we can't win in the second half. CEOs show us a pathway to how that can be done. And I'll finish with that final point, which is that business leads to lead from the front. That's what we heard from CEOs. That's what we've heard from some of the policymakers, because the geopolitical reality is that we are in a fractured and fragmented world. We're not in 2015 where Christiana, a good friend of all, several of us, could say, you will do this, you will do that, you will do this, right? We're not in that world anymore. So business leads to lead consistently from the front, and we need to navigate a new pathway of collaboration, Goal 17, to find ways to publicly and privately win in the second half. And we can't go to penalties, and we can't go to extra, well, particularly as a Brit, we can never go to penalties, right? And we can't go into extra time. But we can, I think, start to imagine, looking around, that the future is actually already here on renewables, on water technologies, on trust and traceability and transparency and data revolutions that are taking place. It's just not evenly distributed, and it's just not being invested in or collaborated in yet in a way that we can imagine that win. But I hope as a result of some of the things that you hear today, you will be able to feel emboldened and strengthened and have a few more arrows in the quiver for you to use in your own organizations on that journey. So with that, let me hand over to Sander from the UN Global Compact, who is also, I'm told I'm not allowed to promote you, so it's definitely Assistant Secretary General, but I should say it is a shift, as well as CEO of the Compact. It recognises, I think, the importance of business, Sander being promoted to Assistant Secretary General. So thank you.
Peter. Thanks, Peter, and really good morning to all of you, and great to have you here at this early hour. But Peter, I keep thinking you probably do need to change your choice of football team. It's giving you a lot of angst. It's giving you a lot of angst. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with penalties. You can still win in there. You just get your best people, your best leaders, the goals right there, and just get the shot. That's my take on football here. But anyway, good morning to all of you. And Peter, let me just first start by saying it's been amazing, this 15-year journey that you've had with the UN Global Compact, this 12th study survey, and it's really always great to just still see the energy the imagination, the enthusiasm that comes not only from how the survey is structured, from the increased engagement from CEOs, as you say, getting more and more CEOs engaged in the questions, a broader and more diverse view. And I really do hope that, not only for those gathered here, but, the CEOs that then use this study to shape, business strategy, to shape policy engagement, to shape discussions with, a broad range of stakeholders continues to add value. I know for us, it's always a study that we use year-long to shape discussions and to drive a lot of our advocacy work. So very much appreciated, both you, Peter, for your leadership, and Julie, who's a great partner, and Michael, who really does the work. So thank you, Michael. Thank you. And our teams, lots of the collaboration between Accenture and the Global Compact teams and our local networks who bring in the CEO. So thank you all very, very much. Huge undertaking of this report. I imagine it was a year where people were inundated with a lot of stuff, a lot of questions, a lot of what's going on here, and what we thought we may have been able to solve for at the end of last year certainly hasn't been solved for. So we come into 23, we're carrying forward crises, but also, at least from the UN perspective, seizing the opportunity of a stock take, the opportunity to pause at the halftime. And I think this year you will hear a lot about the halftime pause. What you do at halftime, I think, is very reflective. It could be a moment of angst and despair, but it could also be a moment of, looking forward into what the future might hold, reimagining the agenda, so to speak. My analogy, I think, slightly more positive than Peter about the halftime is, and I'll draw from my Kenyan roots, about marathoners, and I do not claim to be a marathoner, but from those that I've spoken to, when you reach that 21 mark, is when you sort of dig deep and think, okay, I've gotten to where I need to get to. What do I need to drive forward for the next? And possibly your technique even changes between the first 21 and the next. So I see this as the opportunity first to just acknowledge the immense efforts that a lot of business leaders have taken to get their businesses to where they are. It has not been an easy 2 to 3 years. Nobody would have expected all of the challenges that we've seen. Certainly, we've heard CEOs who've had to literally rethink business on their feet, figure out how to get into working from home, figure out how to get their goods out to customers when customers were not coming into the stores, figure out how to keep supply chains up and running, figure out how to get inputs and outputs out to where they need to go. So it has not been easy, but certainly we have made it through to some extent. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. But the study, as you will see, certainly reflects the gravity of the global crisis. 87% of CEOs currently believe that the levels of geopolitical instability will continue to limit our ability to achieve the SDGs. Peter talked about the 10 or so existential threats that CEOs face. This is one that I think is so pervasive, and now more than ever, we continue to see politics, business, geopolitics extremely intertwined. CEOs are being called to tables and to discussions so much far out of their remit, but so necessary if business is to continue. Companies still will continue to be impacted by global shocks, but we do look at how we can reimagine and seize the opportunity to work and do different. Overall, as you see in the study, CEOs were optimistic about the role that business can play in a more resilient future, but only if companies embrace the sustainability movement more. They did acknowledge that the private sector could offer critical financial and political capital, serving as an economic lifeline and stabilizing global and local economies. So yes, there is a fact that it's daunting, but there's also the fact that businesses see they can play a role in this geopolitical discussion. CEOs also said that by innovating and creating people-centered solutions, they could shape a future to benefit companies and communities. In fact, 51% of the CEOs, as you'll see in the study, believed that business could play a critical role in advancing sustainable development with increased commitment and action. So it's a low 51%. I think we need to see what we can do to galvanize that spirit into something a little bit more positive. But what was very clear was that for corporate sustainability to succeed, there needed to be more multilateral and more stakeholder support. And that's why, again, doing the survey with an increased global footprint and increased participation will help us see how we can join those dots. It's no longer not a reality that a CEO sitting in, and I'll pick on Christoph here, Minneapolis, may have to look really far out in terms of where's that footprint, where's my vulnerability, where's that weak point, and it could lie somewhere at the other end of the world. But without a strong multi-stakeholder, multilateral framework, you realize your weak points are really far out, and you do need to be in touch with them. One CEO, the CEO of GM, Mara Barry, said, we need to work with governments and policymakers to ensure that we're coming up with solutions that are not just good for business, but good for people, good for the country, good for environment. We do all need to sit around the table. And as we approach this halfway mark, and you'll hear a lot about stock takes, as I said, the SDG stock take, there's a climate stock take as well. Overall, CEOs say that they recognize that continuing to focus on sustainability builds your brand, builds your customer base, builds your positive perceptions of your business. And most importantly, it's really the right thing to do. At the Global Compact, we continue on, I think, our 22nd year of supporting businesses in this journey. Tomorrow, we announce a new initiative. We're calling them the SDG movements, which is an opportunity for business leaders around the world to, again, reimagine the future agenda, reimagine what it would look like to kickstart momentum around the SDGs for success in the second half. So we'll be launching that together with the Secretary General tomorrow. But as we work to get this agenda back on track, this survey I know will serve as a guidance tool for many of you to be able to see how you can shape and frame your actions, business strategy and operations, policy, and certainly for all the stakeholders we need to bring around the table. So with that, I'll pause, and I'd like to invite Michael to just give us more of the detail of the survey and share some of the insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sonda and Peter, for the introduction. I think could not have set it up better for me. Just to highlight, so the study today is called Reimagining the Agenda, Unlocking Global Pathways to Resilience, Growth, and Sustainability for 2030. And we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how do we synthesize the viewpoints of 2,600 CEOs. And as Peter and Sonda remarked, we've been working on this study for over a year. And actually, the initial creation of it started right as Russia was invading Ukraine. And we had to really reflect on how that changed the dynamic, how that was changing for business as well as for governments and multilaterals. So we tried to think at that halfway mark, and with these geopolitical crises and kind of the laundry list of everything that we're dealing with, how do we reimagine what the next 7.5 years as we look towards 2030 could really look like? So we wanted to try and bring that together, and you'll see that in the imagery as well in terms of the two pathways we might like to go on, is one that's a little bit more stark and maybe a little bit darker, and one that's got a lot more hope and kind of greenery and kind of hope in the end for us. So as Peter mentioned, this is the largest study we have. We did 2,600 CEOs from all over the world. We had 128 countries represented, as well as 18 different industries. And that was also reflective of the 130 interviews we did one-on-one from CEOs all over the world, from Africa to Asia, and the Americas. And also, we wanted to make sure it was a representative balance, too, in terms of large companies and small and medium enterprises. So we had about a 50-50 split, which is great. It's always great to get large companies like Ecolab and others to participate, but we also wanted to make sure we had a representative sample across those small and medium businesses that represent a large swath of the private sector. And I know Sonda and the UN Global Compact is quite keen to make sure we mobilize small and medium enterprises in the next few years, given that the influence they have over our overall supply chains. Well, getting a little preview now. Yeah, exactly. We're going to get through this real fast, everyone. Yes. So just to give you a set of kind of the overall global footprint, you can get a feel for, to Peter's point, the Global South representation. We were really quite pleased. We made a very concerted effort this year to make sure we had representation from Africa, Asia, Oceania, Latin America, just to really make sure we're capturing that perspective overall. This gives you kind of a flavor of the overall level of engagement. I think to Peter and Sonda's point, it really does reflect the level of engagement CEOs are feeling on sustainability. Again, this is 2.5 times our historical average for the CEO study. So the level of engagement was just overwhelming this year. Kept us all very busy, which was great, but I think gave us a really nice set of data to work with. Now, one message that did come through in the end was that the global sustainability agenda is off track. And Peter and Sonda certainly highlighted this, where you look at the UNFCCC report, we're on a pathway to 2.5 degrees. We've got different issues from inflation to climate-forced migration. The list kind of goes on and on. But one thing that did come out and through the conversations that I think was particularly interesting this year rather than other years was that CEOs understand the interlinkages of all these different issues, like the complexity and how they interact with one another. That came through a lot more clearly this year, where you have the climate crisis impacting the food crisis, which is therefore challenging our efforts around poverty and health. And so I think that interlinkage really came through very clearly for us this year. And ultimately, they're trying to navigate through this level of uncertainty that seems somewhat unprecedented overall, and very in line with the WEF theme this year of cooperation in a fragmented world. How do we cooperate more and try and navigate what is an increasingly fragmented world, both geopolitically and within the business community as well? Now, I did want to highlight that we do have a number of different challenges that CEOs are navigating across the patch here. And that really has forced them to think through different pieces of this. And the top 5 challenges across this space were inflation and price volatility, talent scarcity, threats to public health, climate change, as well as trade regulation. And you'll see those are all above 90% for some level of impact. But to Peter's point earlier, there are 10 global challenges that CEOs are facing at any level. And we only gave them 17 to choose from. There's a much longer list we could have, but we tried to whittle it down. And ultimately, I think what we're trying to do here is make sure that people understand that these challenges, they're not going away. As Christoph, you reflected in our discussion, actually, the list just keeps growing. Like, these challenges don't go away. The pandemic, then inflation, then the geopolitical challenges. The list continues to get more and more complex, and we have to get used to that. That is the new normal for us. And so we have to find a way to navigate through that. But one of the biggest challenges we are seeing is those geopolitical issues. So 87% of CEOs found that they are disrupting and jeopardizing our ability to achieve the SDGs in the end. And I think that's really stark because, ultimately, the geopolitical challenges are taking many different forms for us. They are the Russia-Ukraine conflict. They are trade tensions between the US and China. They are somewhat fraught transitions of power in democracies all around the world. So these geopolitical pieces are really playing out in different senses, but they really compound these existing global challenges we are already dealing with. So we really need to try and work through some of these geopolitical issues as a group. Now, sustainability has emerged as the core of resilience. It really is the kind of hope, and I think a lot of the CEOs reflected on, it is the way to weather these shocks ultimately. And they're taking different actions in terms of investing in new products and services. They're moving towards more circular business models. They're trying to transform their supply chains. And we're really trying to see this transformation ultimately happen where it's no longer just a climate imperative. We're no longer just trying to tackle climate change. We're trying to think through how we use this as a foundation for security, growth, and resilience. So trying to balance all these different shocks that are coming through. Now, part of what we've seen as well is over time, we've always asked CEOs, how important is sustainability in your actual job? And we saw a 15 percentage point jump over the last few years in terms of almost every CEO feels like it is now core to who they are and their role in an organization to embrace sustainability, advocate for it, and try and drive it forward. And this is really being driven by an increasing pressure from a variety of stakeholders. Over the course of the study, over the course of the 15 years we've been working on this, customers and employees have always ranked quite highly in terms of the influence. But over the last couple of years, we've seen 2 stakeholder groups in particular rise to the forefront. Investors in the capital markets have really driven things forward. The investor pressure has gotten increasingly high for organizations, which has been great to see. And then this year in particular, I think as a response to the geopolitical challenges, we've seen governments actually rise up to be a top 3 stakeholder as companies have tried to navigate through these various geopolitical issues and trying to coordinate action across different sectors. So we've seen a really interesting dynamic there. Sorry. So I wanted to focus in on a couple of different elements to this, and both in the supply chain as well as in the workforce. So as we think through the supply chain, this is one area where we feel like the CEOs came through over and over again. We have all been dealing with this, the couch that took 8 months to get there, your favorite product not being on the shelves. It's been really challenging for companies to navigate this. But we see that companies are trying to embed a new form of their supply chains in their sustainability strategies. It's becoming quite key to what they want to do. And I think we see this playing out in a few different ways. You saw over half of CEOs thinking through how they can look at better data collection across the supply chain, as well as in particular thinking through how they tackle some of the social issues that exist throughout the supply chain, human rights, gender equity, and other topics. And this is, I would say, by far and away the biggest challenge CEOs are dealing with. It's very tricky, very complex. I don't think candidly anyone has figured it out. We're all still trying to work through it. But it is encouraging to see that people are trying to take, to Peter's point, the data revolution, the ESG revolution forward. and try and take that, whether it's from regulatory pressure, from stakeholder pressure, or just from a need to operate the business in a more flexible way. The other piece I wanted to highlight was on the workforce. The people element really came through quite heavily this year. Really human-centric sustainability and all these different issues came through quite clearly to us, but really thinking through the workforce as a crucial lever to building resilience. And globally, almost all the CEOs felt like this was a top challenge impacting them through a few different levers. We saw them that the number one action across any that we gave them was reskilling and upskilling of the workforce. We as Accenture have tried to do this. We've delivered, I think, Peter, close to 1 million different modules to our own teams around the world, but trying to prepare this workforce with not only sustainability skills, but artificial intelligence, data analytics, other skills that they need to be more flexible in this current environment is the number one resilience action that they are taking moving forward. So really trying to focus on making sure they have the skills to move forward. As we all have kind of navigated the last few years, it's taken a toll on us in various ways. Some people are taking care of ill family members. Others have had their lives disrupted through work, climate migration, other pieces. So a number of companies are trying to focus on offering stronger physical and or mental health support. Particularly the mental health support came through quite clear in a lot of the interviews. It's just put a strain. The remote work, children at home, right next to them, a number of our colleagues, I see them running in and out, and I have no idea how they do that as a single person, but I greatly admire the parents who are able to balance both caring for their children as well as working through what is very demanding jobs for all of us.
Not getting a lot of sympathy from the audience.
Yeah, I know, yeah, exactly. And the final piece is around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we did hear that piece come through quite clearly, particularly as companies are trying to think through making sure that they're bringing those diverse mindsets to try and solve these really tricky problems. They want those diverse perspectives, those diverse experiences culturally and otherwise, and really trying to bring that home. Now, I did want to give you all just a quick break from the statistics to reflect on a topic that came up very organically in our discussions. This was not in the survey. This is actually just was prompted by the discussions with the CEOs, and that is the topic of equity. And it really came up as we have this global volatility and rising expectations from different stakeholders, but they're trying to think through how they redeliver those products and services to ensure better access and opportunity. And this came through particularly clear for food, energy, health industries, where they're trying to think through for those really core essential services, how do we make sure they're getting equal access across different groups in society? As an example, we spoke to a pharmaceutical company who is redesigning their clinical trials to make sure that medicine is actually going and being tested in communities that will actually receive it. It's not a biased sample. And so trying to make sure that those are more inclusive. And we heard this from the energy companies, particularly in Europe, trying to make sure that as people who are on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, that as they're dealing with 30-40% energy inflation, that they're not being forced out of their homes or dying or having other complications from this. So it's become a real interesting dynamic and something that came up very organically. So I wanted to highlight that for you all. And finally, the last set of statistics, I promise, is a timely one coming out of COP15. We wanted to give a bit of a nod to biodiversity, which really is a core component of resilience. However, business action on this remains somewhat low, unfortunately. But 80% of CEOs understand that this is a risk and that it is important. However, only a third are actually taking action on any kind of nature protection or nature positive actions. And we heard that this came from a couple different elements. One was an overall kind of lack of goals at the time we were conducting this survey. Thankfully, coming out of COP15, we now have a different set of goals. At least we have a 20 by 30 and some overarching global vision. However, one thing that did come through is we are probably 10 to 15 years behind in terms of maturity when we think about the carbon and climate space versus the biodiversity space in terms of actually measuring it and taking that forward. So we do need to really try and close that gap because they are so closely interrelated and we are all very dependent on ecosystem services as a society. So to bring this all home, we tried to think through a set of ways that we could really find the business opportunity on all this, not only to build resilience, but to unlock growth and really embrace sustainability as a whole. So we've identified a set of resilience actions for the private sector as well as a set of actions for the public sector. Now we call these our ingredients for resilience, and it was really hard to synthesize down 2,600 different perspectives from all over the world, different cultural contexts, into some very clear tactical actions. And I realize this may be a little hard to read for those in the room, but I'll try and cover them here. We broke them down into 4 main areas: strategy, workforce and organization, supply chain and data, and ecosystem management. So starting with the strategy piece, we wanted to make sure we were setting that really ambitious level of engagement and goal setting when it came to sustainability and the SDGs, whether that was transitioning to new sustainable business models, circular or otherwise, establishing science-based targets, or really committing to quantified, measurable targets, again, adopting some nature positive or nature strategies as part of your business, and then trying to think through, as you're doing these investments in digital, in M&A, in any kind of aspect, making sure that you're considering those ESG considerations, whether you're trying to acquire talent, new products and services, you make sure you're deploying your capital in a thoughtful way that's supportive of sustainability. Workforce and organization, we've hit on a few of these, but making sure you're supporting the workforce with physical and mental health, building that representative workforce to really reflect the communities in which you're operating, upskilling and reskilling them as the economy continues to change. And then thinking from a governance perspective, what we found really helpful for our own organization and others is really trying to align those incentives internally, providing that kind of compensation and other guidance to make sure that people take action, which has been great for all of us to see actually people actually asking more questions around sustainability. Not that they have to be measured on it, they want to seek to understand, and that's been a great lesson to kind of see them undergo. From a supply chain perspective, this one was obviously our largest one this year and came up quite frequently, but trying to advance the data piece came through very clearly, and particularly from a standardized data perspective, it's very hard to get that data further down the supply chain beyond tier 1, 2 level of suppliers, and trying to enhance the overall visibility so that you can make those more informed decisions as a company. And then, given that it is very hard to predict this world, I don't think any of us predicted how the last 2 or 3 years would have gone, but trying to apply scenario planning where you can, again, even as a science fiction fan, I could not have foreseen the last 2 or 3 years, but I think you try and think through some various scenarios to try and plan again according to that. In terms of R&D, again, I think a lot of sustainability actually happens there. I think IDEO or somebody at some point talked about how 80% of sustainability actually happens in that design phase. So actually thinking through how you design products and services differently. And then finally, trying to think through how we secure the energy supply, particularly in markets that are more subject to disruption, trying to make sure that energy supply is secure so you're less open to those shocks. Finally, on ecosystem, in recognition that no company can do this on their own, trying to engage in those strategic partnerships, both within the private sector, so industry consortiums, but also trying to think of how we partner with multilaterals, with governments, to try and advance this agenda. And as part of that engagement with governments, making sure we're advocating for sustainability policy to enable this overall journey. And that brings us to the last slide, where just one thing we started recently is recognizing that the increasing importance of government in enabling sustainability and enabling business to really take the reins, innovate, and really drive that transformation we want to see, often more at speed and scale that we need. So trying to think through a specific set of policymaker asks that we could give each year. So these align to 1.5 degree for the national determined contributions, cooperating on biodiversity, carbon pricing, thinking through how we actually deliver on the adaptation financing that we need to deliver to the global south, trying to streamline the regulatory environment, particularly from an ESG measurement standpoint, where we're making some progress in the private sector with ISSB and others, but I think at a global level, trying to make sure it's consistent across markets would make all of our lives a little bit simpler. Enabling the circular economy, and even just investing in basic infrastructure, roads, bridges, airports, making sure we can actually get these sustainable goods out. Enabling an EV infrastructure came through quite often. And also thinking through the people side of this is from a just transition point of view, providing the education and policy support to make sure as we transition away from these other industries to new industries, making sure we're not leaving that workforce behind and kind of contributing to further social unrest and other pieces of this. And the final point was around SMEs. Sanda and the UNGC have worked very closely with this group, and one of the biggest challenges they have is around financing and education, and making sure they have the tools, because they're smaller, they have less resources, so we need to be able to enable them to adopt sustainability and really embrace it as a whole. So again, we really tried to synthesize the findings of what was a very diverse and very dynamic set of CEOs this year, and it's been a personal privilege to get to lead this effort for the last couple of years. So thank you to Peter and Sanda for your continued support, and to the UN Global Compact team, who I could certainly not do this without, kind of through the patience that they exhibit through all of this. And so with that, Peter, I'll invite you back up on stage to take us to the next group.
I'm going to put this up here with water and coffee. Come on. You are supposed to be coming, indeed, absolutely. This is your homes, you know, back as a Swiss international business leader.
Absolutely, glad to be here. I remember 15 years ago when we were talking sustainability as too, we were on the side agenda. and now it's becoming the
we
core
used to get the
agenda.
little room in the corner, basically.
Ended up in the tent over there as
Or
well.
the tent, yeah.
That's been a long way.
And look, I mean, we are very, very privileged to have you here, Christoph. I mean, I know
Great to be here.
you started this journey a very long time before you were CEO, and it's been absolutely critical to the way you've tried to steer Ecolab both through the crisis, but as you were appointed probably just at the beginning of the
January 6, 2021.
right.
It was a hell of a day. Turning on TV and looking at what was happening on Capitol Hill, said that's going to be a great start of a new chapter.
But actually, you know, we say in the report, one company's resilience is another's opportunity, and all of the things that we talked about here on the one hand are threats, and they're threats to your business too, and risks and resilience. But as you know, a company that specializes in water solutions, that specializes in human health and hygiene solutions, that specializes in a lot of the different parts of the portfolio that in a pandemic are actually incredibly important. I mean, I'd like to start off. I should say, Christoph, I think you've read through your agenda, but Christoph is the chairman and CEO of Ecolab and phenomenal leader on this topic and has been for decades on this topic, but particularly has championed the water issue in particular and the fact the interrelated nature, as you mentioned, of the biodiversity, circular economy, water, for nature side of things, as well as the energy system. I think I'd just give one data point would be, even if you wanted to achieve the climate change targets of 1.5 degrees, 2.5 degrees, you could only do it for 54% through the energy system. The rest has to come through the way we manage the circular economy, water, biodiversity, and so on. And you've been probably, arguably, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, champions of that. So how do you see this era? I mean, for you, you're quite well prepared. Did you see some of these things coming? Do you see opportunity or do you see risk, both for you and more generally in delivering the SDGs?
It's a great question. We're really at this mid-time, as you guys were talking with the analogy on soccer, obviously here. But the world around us has pushed us to accelerate. When we think what happened the last 3 years, as you mentioned, with COVID, and then I remember, my second month as a CEO, we got the big freeze in Texas, which was unusual for Texas, was usual for places like here, obviously in Switzerland. It stopped 80% of our supply of feedstocks for 6 weeks. So we were really experiencing resilience one-on-one, where you have
60%.
80%.
80% for 6
of
weeks.
our supply for 6 weeks was stopped. And how do you manage your supply chain? How do you serve customers? What we do is essential for customers to operate. In a hospital,
It's life or death.
It's life or death. So it can be in a hospital, so making sure that the operating room is always disinfected, is safe for patients to be operated, can be in a power plant, can be in a paper mill, it can be in a restaurant, it can be wherever we operate around the world in 3 million locations. If we're not there, they stop operating. And sometimes it's life or death, like you mentioned as well in here. So we've learned it the hard way as well in saying, well, we need to rethink it differently. And one of the things that we did was to prepare for Texas Freeze 2.0, which obviously did not happen. That's always the way things are happening.
Crossed.
Absolutely. But on the other hand, what we learned with the so-called Texas Freeze 2.0 helped us operate in China. Then afterwards, because they got different challenges, obviously, with COVID, where many plants had to stop operating because of infections as well. So we've learned as well at the same time. So that was for us, but it was really driven by this feeling of we need to accomplish our mission. It's times where we can make history and we can decide that we want to be proud in the future of the way we've managed our operations, how we've served our customers, how we've supported our employees as well, or maybe not, and just thinking so short term. And I'm becoming increasingly hopeful that businesses around us, and I see that with the thousands of customers that we serve around the world, are shifting and seeing sustainability, as you mentioned, Sandra, as we've seen with all the facts before, as a business opportunity. And I'm firmly convinced, and I'll conclude on that the only way that we can accelerate on our goals is that it makes business sense. It's kind of the ugly truth. If our customers can make more money, they're going to go there. And if they can't, they're not going to go there.
And we find that, I mean, I think I don't know if Mark is here today, but I think you've seen some of this work that we've been doing with Fjord, which is one of our agencies, that the human-centric outcome here is that it can't be a trade-off at a human level. It has to be faster, better, cheaper, and sustainable, right? That actually, when we did the Glasgow case studies, we actually interviewed Glaswegians. What are they prepared to do? What are they not? That every single one wants more sustainable opportunities, wants to be proud of what they buy.
Yep.
In your case, proud of what you do and how you react. But they can't afford. They certainly can't afford in the inflationary environment where the UK Goldman Sachs says there's 23% inflation, and you see wage inflation of 1 to 2%, right? They can't afford it, but they don't want it. So we have to find ways to innovate that where the products and the services, Emilio, I see there, but innovate products and services that are faster, better, cheaper, data-driven, technology, leveraging it, and deliver on the SDGs. It's not easy, but that is, am I right? Or?
Totally. There's an example that's running through my mind. So while you were talking in here, a big brewing company that's not going to be named after all the parties that we've gone through. So maybe beer topic might be a good one.
It has to be a client of mine that we put in touch.
And I remember being with him 18 months ago, and we were talking about the water challenge. And he said, I have no time to focus on water. I need to focus on carbon. And I said, well,
good luck with that.
Why is it one and not the other? Because both are related. And first and foremost, beer is water for the most part. Obviously, so you might want to have clean water, pure water, to produce better beer. It's going to be better for your consumers. And by the way, so if you save water, you're going to save energy as well at the same time. And he was saying, yeah, but with all inflationary questions right now, I can't afford to invest more in the short term here. There's too much going on. And so, well, that can help you reduce your total cost.
So you can't afford not to invest.
Absolutely. Because we know that when you reuse and recycle water in a plant, especially in a brewery, well, you recycle 60 to 80% of your energy, ultimately. And we were in a car in the Swiss mountain, and he said, well, I think I need to rethink that. You need a beer?
Oh, yeah, actually, yeah. Beer is nice. And we have a Lacey family rule, never before midday.
But back to that, it's been game-changing. We said, I want to rethink that, and got together with us, with his supply chain team as well, and saying, I want to have one plan that's helping me ultimately reduce my carbon footprint, increase my resilience, and drive more growth, because I will produce better beer at a lower total cost. And that's been game-changing for them. So it's been
and partnerships with the financial sector about the capex up front being able to be then actually paid down through the savings and the OPEX. We see a lot more of that because that's something that does, sit on people's minds, the CFO and the balance sheet. Say a little bit more about that, because those investments in breweries are not cheap. Those investments in plants and assets are not cheap, but we're seeing innovative finance.
They're not, but interestingly enough, more than not, capex is not too much of an issue. Right. There's enough capital out there. It needs to work from an accounting delivery perspective.
Partnerships, the investment.
For the most part, totally.
Yeah.
Yes, and if you know that you can have within a few quarters or within a few years a payback, large companies or smaller companies that are successful, they're going to go on that journey, knowing that it's going to come for sure.
And I think what you're also seeing, which is in the Global South particularly, we have a whole, by the way, anyone who wants to use any of this data, we have reams by industry, by theme, by Global South. And this is why I wanted to have the conversation with you, because it's impossible to present anything at the global level that actually really, really gets into the middle, which is why talking to you about the industry and what's really going on is what makes sense. But anyone who wants the data, we're welcome to share it, because it's there to create change. It's there to empower you. But in the Global South, for example, one of the things that we heard is that they are struggling with the finance. Yeah. Whereas actually, increasingly, that's an opportunity for financial services institutions to find that innovative finance, to finance even the upfront piece because of the rapid paybacks that you're talking about, right?
And you have always more banks that are interested in doing that as well, especially because it's driving a return as well, so short to mid-term as well, not just in 10 or 20 years.
Absolutely.
So at the end of the day, we're back to that question of is sustainability is helping us make more money? Yes. It's going to move faster.
So I'd like to move to another question, which is you saw in the list of 5, talent was number 2.
Yeah.
And I would say that's very closely related to the ESG data revolution. So in other words, it's not about the chief sustainability officer and their control tower, right? Although I'm sure, Emilio, that's not to necessarily downplay the role that you play in terms of, but it's about actually everyone in the organization, or bringing the right data with the right tools, with the right ability to make good decisions that actually include both stakeholders, shareholders, and planetary boundaries together and make those decisions. Where are you on that journey? You said 48, I think you have 48,000 people, you may have more now, but 48,000 people who are delivering these solutions every day, who do need to be upskilled, who do need to have real data to make those decisions and the real tools. How's that journey going?
There's this practical component, but I think there's the emotional component that's even more important. And our teams, especially the younger generation, want to be part of a mission that's making a difference. And especially in that complex world where it's easy to get lost because it's going all over the place, well, you want to have kind of, what's my guidepost? Why am I doing all that? Yeah. The North Star. Why does it matter to go through all that? You know, I'm always kind of stepping back when I'm listening to all those comments and statistics about CEOs, how complex and difficult and rough and all that life is. And I'm saying, well, if it's rough for CEOs, just imagine how tough it must be for everyone else in the organization, because nobody cares about how we feel. And that's not important anywhere, so even within my family. So maybe my dog is interested how I feel, but the rest...
I come below two of them, the dogs.
You do? Yeah. Okay.
In the order of priority. Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it's when we talk about talent, well, we need talent to develop new solutions. We need talent to join our company. Well, we need talent to stay in our own organization.
Do you see more high-quality talent joining?
There's no doubt, no doubt. It's our purpose to protect people and the resources vital to life, water and energy. In 3 million locations around the world, we touch a third of the world food production. We protect 2 billion people around the world. And the fact that we're measuring every single second as well, how much water have we helped save, and in 21, we haven't reported 22 yet, was enough for the drinking needs of over 700 million people. Yeah. Well, this is driving people. Yeah. And on social media, they talk about it. We're part of a journey that's worth fighting for. Yes. As well. So there's this emotional component beyond the whole question on obviously skill data systems.
The mindset in
that
a way.
We need to have.
So it's sort of winning hearts and minds. And that's actually paying out a dividend. A talent dividend.
And it's creating resilience, because when you're doing something that's driving you, if you're a mountaineer, you wanna reach that summit as hard as it can be. Well, it's fulfilling. If it's just hard and you've no idea where you're gonna go, well, you're gonna give up as well. So I think this emotional component is gonna be game changing. Well, today and even more tomorrow.
So. Michael, if you can get the team to bring up the tiles, the resilient tiles, yeah. I just want to finish off with. I think we're getting quite close to the end, but anyone who knows Ecolab, anyone who knows you, and anyone who knows Doug before as well, right? I mean, I think you've taken it to another level in terms of practicality and in terms of, but I would say. You are by nature one of the most collaborative leaders I know, right? And that is going to be an essential part of not just resilience, but new growth models, which is the other side of resilience. And the growth models that produce the products and the services and the pathways from business and the entrepreneurial spirit and the innovation that actually allows us to get to the SDGs. And when I look at this, I don't actually look at it as a resilient set of tiles. I look at it as one of the greatest market opportunities ever to be codified on paper, right? Like from a strategy perspective, if you take another lens and an innovation lens, is like you or I running businesses. Yeah. What are the 2 or 3 things that you would emphasize that are going to help us with no penalties, with no extra time, because that's just benefits Manchester City and Manchester United, which I recreate to. They call themselves the Red Devils, so I'm just going to leave that there, right? Okay. But let's, on a serious note, what is going to get us there?
It's going to be first and foremost innovation. And when we think as well, the last round of the big inflation in the 70s, I wasn't exactly running businesses back then, so you and I, so we're doing different things at that time, obviously. But if we look back, so those years, what truly happened then afterwards, well...
Do you mean the oil shocks, the oil price shocks, and then...
In the 70s, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the energy spikes the last time we saw this kind
which was the last time we had these huge inflation, so kind of almost globally, but mostly in the US as well. Well, it drove so much innovation. The personal computer came after that as well. It was one way to automate, to reduce the cost as well. Then the internet came, sharing data. Okay, the dot-com happened as well, so in 2000, but then ultimately great things happened as well afterwards. So after those tough times, there's this huge wave of innovation that's coming.
Creative destruction, right? Is this
absolutely, yes.
Absolutely.
So I think that we're going to enter a new phase of dramatic innovation, and digital technology is going to be game-changing for sure. You mentioned data. It's about knowledge. It's learning from each other. It's knowing who has the best practice, what's the best I can accomplish, who is having the right solution.
Not in my industry, but across
absolutely elsewhere. And now we can do that with technology, for sure. So innovation is going to be the big one. The second is going to be talent, because ultimately, without expertise, without people believing, driving the future towards that mission, well, nothing is going to happen at the end of the day. And the last is making sure that, we were talking about that with Sandra earlier today, many talk about this green premium. Today, which means it's think about sustainability as a major investment first before you get the payback. And I think this is the wrong way to think about it. It needs to be so a green benefit. The quicker you can get the payback, the faster we're going to move. And that's why we need to find ways to develop innovation, business model practices that are driving returns as quickly as we can. One of the examples is the sustainable aviation fuel that we could talk about, but that'll maybe just pause here.
No, we're part of Clean Skies as well. I mean, it's hugely important that we innovate to get there, and green hydrogen, the same thing. It's we can't get to where we need to without these innovations that are still very early, right?
Absolutely. So when we see the airline industry, so when...
I know how much more it costs me, but it's not that much. And as a pooled set of investments in the future of, because I mean, I have the internal and external role at Accenture, so we have 745,000 consultants who typically do like to jump on planes, although we've stopped them doing that as much as they used to. But, I mean, it's very, very real. We have to find a way to create sustainable aviation, sustainable shipping, right?
And we know that we can do it. Hydrogen is going to take a few more years, obviously, to get to. Electric planes, I don't know if we're going to experience that. So,
they are electric planes. I'm not sure I'd fly
they
one.
Are, for sure. They're not exactly so commercial airliners today, but sustainable aviation fuel. I was thinking in our home base in Minnesota, there's a lot of agriculture. There's great ag companies as well over there. There's technology company like ours as well. There's Delta Airlines who said, we'd like to have the Minneapolis airport become the first hub of SAF going forward as well. And then there's the question, well, can we afford that as well? But on the other hand, there was this discussion between all the partners of saying, do we truly have a choice? We'll have to get that done.
Comparative advantage, potentially.
Totally, right? Absolutely. So you can have more consumers, more eccentric consultants that are going to jump on planes as well. It's going to be good for Delta Airlines as well, but ultimately it's going to be good for everyone.
We like anything that's good for consultants. Now, on a serious note, though, that actually those clusters that emerge around those investments, I mean, we see that in different parts of the world, and we've been working on that with WEF, with the UN, taking a technology and really building the clusters around it that relate to the core business. Actually, that's where the entrepreneurship starts, where you see the second tier, third tier, fourth tier, the right universities, the partners coming in and making. So to making an investment like an investment, I'm not suggesting necessarily you do it, but in an airport like Minnesota, you'd see an innovation cluster and hub emerge around it. And we've seen it so many times, right?
And it's the only way to get there. Which is interesting. So in this world where we talk about deglobalization, everyone is looking for their own sake, their own future. The pandemic has driven that in a crazy way as well, where everybody had to protect themselves in a way. And on the other hand, we know that the solutions that you're talking about, can only be found when we work together.
That's totally true. I'm going to finish with this, which is, I mean, I think the interesting thing, I don't know if you agree with this, but for me, the boundaries of organizations have basically disappeared, right? The supply chain is part of our organization. We're responsible upstream and downstream as big global brands, right? Maybe not legally, but actually in the court of public opinion, in your reputation. So I think this issue of enabling diversity, enabling and upskilling suppliers and actually customers, I think it's just, I think the old boundaries that our fathers and mothers grew up with when they were in business, they don't exist. I mean, last night, the dinner Sandra and I attended, I don't know who knows who Tim Curtis is, but who originally was a very famous filmmaker in the UK who created Blackadder and created Mr. Bean and created all of but actually then created Live Aid, then Comic Relief, and now it's turned to sustainability. He told us a story that his father, when he worked for Unilever, had a choice between polluting the Mersey or making more money for Unilever, and he took and being given an OBE for it in the UK, and he took the choice of making more money for Unilever. And I don't think that's true anymore, and I don't think that certainly we end up with Paul Polman and Alan Jope, we know that's not true anymore. So there's a huge shift that's taking place. Tell me, one project that you're most proud of that's now, and one project that you are extremely excited about next?
So 2 questions here. The first one is what we're just launching now, or a few months back, which we've called Ecolab Water for Climate. It's to leverage the experience with the brewer that we talked about before.
I told the brewer to use you.
There's this knowledge that water is the main driver to reduce carbon footprint is something that's unknown for most businesses and for many governments as well, spending quite much time with the European Union as well on that. It's seen like water and energy are 2 different things. They're totally related, as you and I know, obviously in here. So we've launched this program since we serve 3 million customers in 40 industries in 170 countries to have an overall program that helps you understand in my plant, in my unit, what's my water balance, what's my energy balance.
With a very specific data-driven industry set of insights.
And then afterwards, having technology to reuse and recycle water, to reuse and recycle
actionable
energy.
Insights.
Actionable. And then making sure that you can track progress as well. And that's been a very interesting journey so far. Great acceptance from our partners as well. The second one is thinking a little bit more down the road is this knowledge.
Well, I was going to say, even something that's, you see the weak signs that you really would like to have, because I know you've been at the heart of creating the Global Coalition on Water, for example. But I'll leave it to you. But something that you're excited about that creates change.
So talking about this one, because we've realized a few years back, so working together with the United Nations, that when we think about the water scarcity challenge, we thought a few years back that we would have this gap of 40% by 2030 between what the world needs and what Earth can provide. Well, it's 56% today, so it's going the wrong way, as we all know.
Completely priced wrongly. The externality is completely priced wrongly.
Absolutely. So there was the other fact that was interesting is that 150 companies in the world impact 1/3 of the world water usage. And then you're saying, well, 150 companies, we could be together in a room. We could really collaborate and address that issue. And I've been so pleased to see how hard it was and how much progress we've made together with Sanda and now over 30 companies. Microsoft has been one of the prime movers.
Soon to be Accenture, we've taken too long.
Which has been a great journey. We started in January 2020, so that was just before COVID as well. With 4 key objectives. First was within our own operation to reduce by 100% by 2050 and halfway by 2030 to really align with the carbon as well as a commitment. Second was to work on basins together as well, talking about collaboration, knowing that between steel mill, brewers, hotels, paper mill and all that in the same basin, well, that's the only way you can solve it. And third was really to provide access to 300 million people in a non-charity way, but making sure that you get as well a return on it. And the fourth was helping on the policy side as well. But it's bringing me to what's making me so hopeful. The moment that we will be able to share the knowledge across industries, across companies, across countries as well, of what's the best practice. Back to that brewer, well, what's the best way to produce beer? How much water, how much energy do you truly need? Who is the best in the world out there? And if the whole world were to get back to that high level mark, ultimately, well, just imagine how much impact we could create, both for the environment, for our bottom lines, and ultimately having our talent. That's part of that journey as well. So all solutions are here.
It's as I said, the future is already here, and I know it's a cliche, but it just isn't evenly distributed. We just need to get that knowledge out there, get it applied, get it delivering those returns, as you mentioned, that it does, right? So listen, we all have lots of things to do today. I hope you have benefited from this. Thank you hugely to the Global Compact for a very long and productive partnership.
Yeah.
Thank you to Ecolab for just being consistently at the top of the innovators who are pushing this agenda forward, and you personally, Christophe, and also a great friend, but someone who I'm inspired by the way you've actually really taken hold of this water issue and tried to make it practical and tried to make it scalable. This study is done very, very clearly to help Sander and the UN system, but to help all of you. So if you want any data points, you want the study, there are copies lying around, paper copies, which you probably shouldn't have. Mine are all on here. You can tell someone who's been to Davos too much when their shoes are over there and they're wearing jeans. Can't believe after 17 years you're wearing you're not wearing jeans.
I was planning to have jeans today, saying, well, no.
But on a serious note, thank you to all of you for making time at a horrible time in the morning for anyone who's come from anywhere in the world, right? But I do think that the way you finished off is the way that I think Sander and I both see this study, which is that we're at the half time, that we may not necessarily be 3-1 up, right? But actually, we really can win in the second half, and we can see and imagine how we could do that. And leaders like you, who are both yourself doing it in your own companies, but also helping other companies to achieve those, are critical to that. So please reach out. Please feel free. This is your data, your study, not our study. Please use it liberally, and please ask for more if you would like it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Peter. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. You're a massive inspiration.